My stepfather, Dan, moved his adult daughter into our home, where I had spent my childhood, without telling me anything. He then packed my belongings, took my bag, changed the locks, and locked me out of the house while I was at work. Moreover, my mother is siding with him. It doesn't matter to her if she angers him. I tried to build a smooth relationship with him, but it was impossible. I have always felt inferior and burdensome in this home. Over the many years he has lived in this house, I have kept silent, but he has always tested me. This time, I cannot accept it. My mother will call me as soon as she wakes up, so there is a bit of time due to the time difference. Even if I can avoid giving her an ultimatum, I am ready to resist. I will not yield to her attempts to connect me with the wrong people, despite the guilt she has made me feel over the years. Dan's arrogance and rudeness are evident. How could he move his daughter into my home without permission? It must seem absurd to you too. It does to me as well. I told Dan 2 weeks ago that his 23-year-old daughter, who has a job and is an adult, does not need to live with us. However, she continued to stay for a long time, acting as if she had moved in. I suggested that she share the costs with me, but Dan said she needed time with him, and that she was strictly a guest and so did not need to pay. He accused me of just being jealous. I wanted to argue, but for the sake of family peace, I chose to maintain my inner peace and remain silent. However, the problem then shifted to so-called privacy issues. You wouldn't believe it, but Dan's daughter demanded her privacy be respected. This is my parents' house, not hers. When I entered the living room while she was on a video call, she got angry. If it's a private call, she should use another room instead of the shared living room. As she left in anger, Dan entered the living room, and I complained to him about her blatant rudeness. Her staying in the house made me uncomfortable, and I suggested we only meet when I am not home or when she is outside the house. He became furious and accused me of being ungrateful. He told me that the issues with my father were because of my lack of consideration. I was astonished at his audacity. I wonder why he brought up my father. I did to his daughter what she did to me. I told my mother what he said, but I felt it was unreasonable to expect her support. My mother said I was misunderstanding Dan and insisted we should both apologize, but I refused to apologize to him and continued to ignore him. Last week, when my mother came home, I planned to force them to choose either they leave or I would. This is my father's house, where I had spent my childhood. However, due to his most unforgivable actions, I had to make some decisions. When I returned home, my belongings were packed, and one suitcase had a note attached. It was written in Dan's handwriting. There is no other choice. He was fed up with my attitude. He did not want to choose between me and his daughter and decided to kick me out. It saddens me how quickly our relationship has changed. When he first married my mother, he was a very good person and tried his best to act as a father to me. We got along very well, and I could consult him about anything if there were problems. One day, when his daughter came to our house and told me she had moved to town and that they wanted to spend more time with her father, I was emotional. I was excited to have a new sister. I was happy to welcome her and tried to make her feel like we are real sisters. But from the first meeting, I understood that she did not think well of me. She was uninterested in me. She pretended to like me when our parents were around, but ignored me when we were alone. I had not talked to my parents about this issue. I also distanced myself from her, trying not to involve her too much. As time passed, she effectively moved into my house. During those days, Dan removed his mask as a good father. I feel that he became too familiar with us, and his true self began to appear. He also seems to be taking advantage of the fact that my mother is currently abroad. My mother often stays abroad for months for her job. She recently returned to work. After my father died, she took a long vacation. She needed to take care of me. She ran a small business to support us, but after remarrying, she wanted to pursue her career again. As her daughter, I am old enough to take care of myself. and she probably thought Dan would support me if I needed help. I strongly support my mother's decision and am very proud of her. However, her actions seem to have triggered Dan to start abusing me. The note stated that I could only return home if I apologized to his daughter, and if not, I would need to find a place to live on my own. I had lived with rude people previously, and since Dan seemed interested in learning proper manners by being in a pampered state, I intend to teach that to him. I am not sure how to deal with this yet, but I do not intend to leave. I will contact my mother to explain the situation without being kicked out of the house by a man who do not even own it. I will tell my stepsister that we will not live together, and it is necessary for her to listen to me even just once. I do not intend to listen to her, so she should follow my instructions. What I do next will depend on how she responds. This is a choice between resolving this peacefully or having family issues. I prefer peace over harboring problems. Am I overreacting? Am I acting out of jealousy? I try to look at this issue from as many perspectives as possible. How can you justify evicting someone without notice while they are at work? Isn't that disrespectful? Isn't that an uncontrollable brazenness? The more I think about this matter, the more problems I feel. I've decided to stop being kind. I am deeply considering what actions I should take. Since this incident, I have remained calm. I am confident that the choices I have made are the most appropriate under the current circumstances. I have always tried to behave courteously, but the people I interact with do not recognize it. As soon as my mother woke up, she called to ask what had happened. I hoped she might be surprised or perhaps agree with me, but neither happened. Instead, my mother questioned where I went wrong and said she wasn't surprised by my actions because Dan had warned her about this issue beforehand. Dan had told her that I was rude and living together was impossible. Knowing that Dan lied to her, I was trembling with anger. So, I questioned my mother about what she thought of it, whether it was towards me, her daughter, or towards the man she had just married. She answered that the time spent together doesn't matter. She said she was simply thinking of everyone in her family. She had been informed in advance that Dan planned to welcome his daughter into our home. Hearing that made me feel like leaving home. But on the day Dan decided to welcome his daughter, he packed my bags, changed the locks, and kicked me out of the house. Dan and my mother were planning to replace me with his problematic daughter. I told my mother I was extremely disappointed in her decision. I criticized her for loving her new family more than me. She was clearly ready to forget her past, me, and to accept her future, which is Dan and his daughter. She tried desperately to deny it and explain, but I had no intention of listening to her words. I indicated to her that I would give her a chance to correct the situation before doing something irreversible. Also, I told them they had 24 hours to leave my father's house. They should never come back, and only my mother was welcome to return. She reacted angrily and eventually tried to shift all the blame onto me. According to her, I had become a changed and ungrateful person. She asked how much I intended to push away the people who support me. She even accused and blamed me for using drugs. Can you believe it? She was convinced that I was consuming some irrational substances. Hearing that, I could only laugh. Dan carried out his plan and succeeded in kicking me out of the house while my mother was not home. He was truly like the stepmother from a fairy tale. After the call with my mother, I started to prepare for work, but I couldn't concentrate without music. Because when the music stopped, the exchange with my mother wouldn't leave my mind. The thought was so strong that I began to tremble. That led to me actually experiencing a severe panic attack. I hadn't been in such a state since my father's funeral. I couldn't believe my father was dead and had days where I saw him in my dreams. At the memorial service, I saw someone who looked like him, but it turned out to be someone else. Now, they are trying to pull me away from precious memories with my father, who cared so much for me. That house is not theirs, and I have no intention of retracting my statement. Dan did not know that the house was in my name. I should have seen his face when I kicked him and his ignorant daughter out of the house. I felt really relieved to be able to drive them away. They revealed their true selves, and I think I handled it appropriately. Dan's plan might have looked something like this. One day, Dan met my wealthy mother. She owned a beautiful and spacious house, and my presence as her daughter could potentially be a hindrance. I had the power to easily remove him from my mother's life. I would have prevented him from transferring the house deed into his name. Therefore, he pretended to be a good person, encouraged my mother to return to work, and gained my trust. As a result, I became friendly to him. I started living with him, feeling safe. But he succeeded in driving a wedge between my mother and me. After we were divided, he used his daughter to make me feel unwelcome. He began to emotionally distance himself from me and directed his affection towards his daughter. This led to my dissatisfaction, anger, and irrational actions. He misunderstood that the house was in my mother's name, and his main goal was to drive me out because I was young. My mother only saw his kindness towards me and believed it. She deeply trusted him, even entrusting her life to him. She would quickly believe that her own daughter harbored hostility towards her stepdaughter. However, her partner was not a good person. My mother dislikes acknowledging her mistakes. He exploited this fact to deceive her. His ultimate plan was to live in the house with his daughter while my mother was away. In a few months, he planned to have my mother transfer the deed of the house into his name. And soon, he plans to proceed with a divorce from my mother, either to acquire half of her assets or to leave her and cash out the assets. However, there might be people who want to defend him. I need to listen to their opinions and reveal the truth. If I had allowed my stepsister to live at home, things might have been different. But she needed to be the right kind of person to live with, and she wasn't. She was very difficult to handle. When using the kitchen, she never cleaned up after herself. Money often went missing when she was in the house. She entered my room multiple times without my permission and used my belongings without asking. I always place things in specific spots, so I notice immediately if something is amiss. Because she touched my belongings without permission, I never intended to live with such a person again. Let's go back to what happened earlier this week. I went to gather all the necessary documents to proceed with the eviction legally. I didn't have time to play around, and I had no intention of leaving any room for them to return. It took a little time, but with the help of a friend, I was able to handle everything quickly. When everything was ready, I immediately headed home. I knocked on the door, and my stepsister opened it but quickly tried to close it, saying, "You are not welcome here." I pretended to be sad and told her I had come to apologize. She looked surprised and confused. It was probably because my behavior was so out of character. Then, her father, Dan, appeared behind her and asked what I was doing. I told him it would take about 8 hours to move everything out of the house. He had a lot of furniture, so I was being quite generous. I told him I was coming back and showed him the court order. And when I said, "If you don't pack up, I'll have to force you out, and everything of value that you own will be discarded. My only concern is getting you out of the house," I meant it, but he didn't seem to take my words seriously. He said that I couldn't take such actions without my mother's permission. According to him, all my actions were illegal, and he intended to have me arrested. At that moment, I told him, "If you want, you can call as many times as you need." However, all they could do was mock me. They eventually realized the court order was genuine and understood that they had no choice but to leave. As a result, I succeeded in evicting them from the house I had lived in since childhood. Still, I wanted to relax and unwind in my father's house without any disturbances. The events of the past few days had been very tough, so I needed some time to relax. My mother had been asking me to apologize to Dan and his family, but since I wouldn't do as she wished, she seemed to have decided to punish me. I ignored her calls for days, but I had nothing in particular to say to her. About 2 weeks later, when my mother returned home, she hit me for the first time. There was a reason for her behavior. I had scheduled a dental checkup, but after the examination, I found out I had to pay for everything myself. The dentist told me that my medical insurance was no longer valid. I was shocked by this news, as I had been insured all along. After several phone calls, it became clear that my mother had removed me as a beneficiary of her medical insurance. Moreover, she had never informed me about it. It can definitely be said that she did this on purpose. I had to pay the full amount myself, which confused me greatly. I felt anger towards her treatment, but I had no intention of letting her have her way. If she wanted to talk, she should do it face to face. Afterwards, I sorted out the insurance paperwork. Later on, I signed out of all the streaming subscriptions my mother was using. My mother is not very tech-savvy, and I got her hooked on streaming services. When she wanted to watch her favorite shows online, she asked me to help set up her account. I wanted to save money, but considering what she had done for me, I decided to add her to my account. It could be said that we had a symbiotic relationship. However, that is a thing of the past now. Later, the streaming subscription was canceled because she failed to pay the usage fees. If I had to pay all my medical bills myself, I thought she should pay for her subscription services herself too. It's easy to imagine how upset and angry she was. I learned many important things from her. When she decided to sever all ties that connected us, I had already been maintaining a distance from her. I understand well that she had provided me with financial support in several crucial areas of my life. She did not want me to leave the house, but still, she knew how to resolve conflicts and could always find a way to make everyone happy. I think my father would not have wanted us to fight over these issues, but in the end, my mother made her choice, and it almost broke my heart. I was her precious daughter, and that's why I couldn't understand why this was happening to me. As I write this, I feel the pain in my heart. This incident was a time when my mother was wrong, and one of the few moments when I was right. I can't help but think how much better it would have been if it were the other way around. I want to see what kind of price Dan will pay in the future. And understanding that I have gotten the house makes me realize I have won. At that moment, I felt like a winner, but as time passed, that feeling of victory turned into sadness. I feel incredibly lonely from the depths of my heart for not being able to see my mother. Being away from my mother for so long has become a heavy burden for me, but pride came first, and I decided to avoid contacting her. If I had reached out to her at that time, maybe she would have opened her heart to me. Perhaps I could have realized sooner that Dan was destroying my relationship with my mother. I was at the office when my mother last spoke with Dan and his family, so I don't know what was said. However, as a result, my mother ended up separating from Dan. Still, my mother and I haven't been in contact for a while, and she is also avoiding talking to me, so I don't know what she is doing. The next time I learned what had happened to her was when I received a phone call from the hospital informing me that she had collapsed. My mother suddenly had a heart attack in a store. When I went to my mother's apartment to check her belongings, I found a letter my father had left for her. Dan had gained my mother's trust and taken everything she had, and I feel regret. If I could, I am filled with the desire to contact my father and apologize. Before Dan put a ring on my mother's finger, I think I should have investigated him more. I truly have many regrets. Have you ever made a dramatic decision that significantly changed your path in life? I wasn't sure if I should tell everyone, but I am focusing on my mother's recovery and supporting her as much as possible. Still, I feel it is my responsibility to inform you all about this incident. As you can imagine, both my mother and I were very dissatisfied with the situation. We were filled with anger and sadness, feeling as if the whole world had betrayed us. However, I focused on caring for my mother and rebuilding trust in our relationship. Dan no longer exists, and his daughter is currently detained by the police. That's because Dan was killed by someone. Someone reported it to the police, and his daughter was taken in as a witness. I am planning to visit her as soon as possible. After what she has done, I want to look into her eyes and see if regret appears on her face. If it doesn't, I might think that she should have met the same fate as Dan. First, I want to express my gratitude to everyone who supported me during this difficult time. Fortunately, my mother has recovered safely. In fact, this was not the first time my mother had a heart attack. I was very afraid and felt like I might lose her. Please believe me. I regret every small mistake I made regarding the romance scam involving Dan. Verification and research are important, and one should not judge things solely based on impressions. At least my father had ensured that my name was properly listed on the house's title deed. Without it, there was a high chance we would have lost the house to them. I also reaffirmed that one should be cautious about whom they invite into their home. The reason is that the person may not be who you think they are. Fortunately, we were able to achieve a good outcome. Still, it deeply pains my heart to hear about people who are in more unfortunate situations than us.